Morning. We're on 76b, a couple lines to the bottom of the page. One second. We're at Tani Tana Kamei Derav. Eight lines in the bottom of the page, middle of the line. 76b. Tani Tana Kamei Derav. There was a Tana that said in front of Rav as follows: Naisin Ham Scharon Mishalom. So this is going back on. One second. Okay. We spoke about the scenario where the guy hires workers to carry stuff. They're told, go meet me at this address, and they get to the address, and there's nothing for them to carry. So he said you pay them like a poil bottle, meaning that you pay them as if you offered a discount. You'll hire them as workers, but they actually don't have to do anything. So it's sort of a compromise value because people, they are gaining from the fact that they don't have to schlep as much. We'll soon see. There was actually a guy, he was extremely fit. He was very built, and I guess he was an Olympic or something, but he needed to carry heavy stuff to maintain his strength. Oh. So the Gemara says actually if you hire him, then you have to pay him full price because he now has to work, do more exercise because you didn't pay him enough, because you didn't give him actually something to work on. Oh. We'll get to it in a moment, in a few minutes. Okay, so Tanakamei Rav, Noislam Schar Mishalom. So one of the authors said in front of Rav, you have to pay them full wages. Amarlei, so he said to him, Habibi Amar, my uncle told me, my uncle told me if I was there, I would only give them like a worker who's paid to do nothing. But and you're saying you pay full wages. The Bryce specifically says, it's not fair to compare work of a guy who actually does the work and a guy who's hired but doesn't do the work. Somebody who's walking away empty-handed, or somebody who's doing nothing. Clearly, the price is indicating that you get some sort of discount for the fact that the guy doesn't have to actually work. So Gemara says, he didn't have a chance to finish his statement. Some say he did finish it. This is what he was saying to him. Habibi Amar, my uncle was saying. Okay, so one second. Okay, so according to the first version, the person who told this to Rav never heard the conclusion of the brisa. That line of the brisa he didn't hear. So therefore, he was under the presumption to pay full salary. Another version is Samu Kamei. He did know the whole brisa of Kamma. Chabibi Amar Yavoy Ano lehavina leyehivna like klal. But Adam Kapel Bottle had Rav Chia been alive, he would not have given you anything. And now, at least, in other words, the author was saying in front of Rav that you get like a worker doing nothing. And Rav Chia was saying you get zero. El kasha hak, what do you do about the brisa? So the Gemara says, like kasha had the saira ari midu orta hadalai saira midu orta hadalai saira arta midu orta. In other words, so Rav Chia says you get nothing because you didn't actually work. And Rav says, what do you mean? We went down, we checked out the brisa seems to indicate, they went down to the field, they checked it out, they were prepared to work, they were hired to work. It's the owner's fault they didn't actually work. So they do get paid as if they worked nothing. So Gemara says, so sort of how do you square these two opinions? So Gemara says, depends if it was Saira La'ari. One second. It depends whether they survey the field beforehand, meaning should the workers have known not to show up? So, for example, let's say the workers were told to cut the field and they saw clouds forming and it was a thunderstorm. they should obviously have known that they're probably not hired for tomorrow. So they shouldn't have gone. Similarly, if they were hired to fill the dishes with water, say it would be the same story. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Kihada Amarava, like Rav explained, second to bottom line, now bottom line of 76b. Haimad Auger Agiri Larifka. Somebody who hires workers, Larifka. Rifka, we said, is this irrigation ditch that surrounds a field. Okay, and what happens? That night, so he hires people to fill it up with water. He wants to water his field. What happens? Va'asa mitra, a rain comes. Umalya maya, and it fills the ditch with rain. Isaira la'arami urte. Say the poilum. One second. If the workers sort of surveyed the field and should have recognized that the field would be wet and moist, so then that's the loss of the poilum of the workers. They should not have come to work. They should have recognized that there's no need to fill an irrigation pond when it was just filled. However, if the field was not surveyed, and they went into work. Say the balbayis, it's the loss of the owner. When he pays them like a worker that was hired to do something but doesn't actually do anything. Okay. Rava says, a guy hires workers to water his field. Okay, and what do you think happens? It rains. It's like a familiar story, right? It's an old story. Okay, who's taking the loss here? Say the poilum. It's the loss of the workers. They don't get hired and they don't get paid. Also, Naro, let's say the river comes. And the river floods the field, or floods enough that the field doesn't need to be watered. Say the balbayas, that's the loss of the owner. The Yavuk bottle, and he pays them like workers that didn't actually do anything. Okay, why is this? So the explanation for this scenario is because if a guy has a field by a river, then the owner of the field knows the ways of the river. He knows the seasonal variation and how much his property needs to be watered accordingly. And therefore, it's his loss for not informing the workers, what would happen. Rava says, the guy hires workers to water the field. The river dried up at midday. If it's unusual that the river would stop, that's the loss of the workers. However, if it does occasionally stop, if the workers live in town, meaning that they know that the river occasionally stops, so it's also their loss. Say the poem, it's also their loss, the loss of the workers. They should have and could have known. However, say the balbayis, but if they don't live in town, so they had no way of knowing the ways of the river, and therefore it's the loss of the owner. But Rava says, "Haiman the ogar aguri la'avito." A guy hires workers for building tasks. And they finish a job at midday. Okay, so let's say they were hired to schlep a bunch of things, for argument's sake. The guy had a bunch of he had a company, he had a bunch of stuff, a moving company. He decided to move somebody's house. So they finished early, a couple hours early. Okay. So now what's the question? Can you pay them for a whole day? Can you use them for another type of work? The answer depends what type of work. If it's a type of work that's more difficult, let's say like watering a field, right? So you have to carry, heavy, water is heavy. So then you wouldn't be able to do that. But if it was something easier, then you would you want them to carry I don't know, empty boxes or feathers or whatever it is, bedding or something like that. Mm-hmm. So then Yavlu, you can give it to them. Inami de Kavasal, Mifkidlu. The Kashmine La Mifkidlu. You can give them equivalent work, but not more difficult. And you give them full salaries. So Gemara says, Velasav Lake a pile bottle. Well, why don't you give them like a worker that doesn't have to work as hard, or like a worker that doesn't do anything? Rav is saying that you have to work them for the rest of the day and pay them in full. What happens if it doesn't have work for them? Why didn't Rav say that they have to be paid anyway? The only question here is whether they're paid the full going rate or they're paid a discount because they didn't actually work, a slightly discounted rate. So why doesn't Rav mention the fact that they should be paid like this discounted rate for not actually for being hired but not actually working? So the Gemara says, "Kika amarova ba'achlushe de mechuza."
What is a mechuza?
The diggers. Interesting. The Ram says it's the diggers. Rashi says it's somebody else. Hold on.
A week if they do not work.
Yeah. Rashi says it's the porters of mechuza. So either they were porters or they were diggers. But these guys were very, very built. And Dilei Avdi, if they don't work, chalshi, they get weaker. So by you not giving them work, they actually have to exercise more. So you have to pay them full salaries anyway. Amar Mar, Shaman Lam Bismasha awesome. Okay, 1 second. Okay, this goes back to the Brisa. So we spoke about workers being hired to build something. It was 2 coins or 2 slom or 8 dinarim or 4 shkalim. That's the same thing. So there's 2 dinar to a shekel and 2 shekel to a sela. So sela, right, is 2 shekel or 4 dinar. You hire a guy to build something for 2 slom, that's either 4 shkalim. 2 slum is 4 shkalim, which is 8 dinarim. So okay, so Shaman is Masha also Ketzad Hayav Shisha dinarim. There was the amount of work left to be done was 6. Nice Lahem Sela, and they did half the job. They still get the full half a job, which is 4 coins. Kasav Rabbanon Yad Poel Al Ha'alyana. The rabbis hold that the worker gets the upper hand, and it appears in the Gemara. The fact that the Gemara is calling them a poel, it appears that they're engaged in hourly type of work. So this is not on a job basis. That typically goes with language such as seicher, kabelin, or chaycher. All of those. Chaycher is typically in the ground. But a seicher or a kabelin, these are people that accept a job. So it's, as opposed to sort of a fixed quote. When you hire somebody to build your house, there's often two ways it can be done. The guy can give you a quote for the entire job, or he can have, you pay as you go. Every hour he'll charge you for, etc. Okay, so now we'll sort of go through this calculation of these workers. Again, they have the total value of the job. Originally, they were hired to do 8 coins, 8 dinarim. And then they changed their mind, or he changed his mind. We'll see. So they get, according to the rabbi's opinion, they have the upper hand because they're allowed to change. A regular worker, an hourly worker, is allowed to change his mind and leave the job site mid job. The one exception, which we'll get to, which is if it's a davar ha'ovid. If it's something that davar ha'ovid means that there is a potential for an imminent loss. Okay. So the rabbis say they did half the job, they get half the payment. If they finish a job, then they get the full payment. Somewhere says pshita. Obviously, if they finish a job, they get the full two slom, 2 coins. So the Gemara says, what happened was labor is now more expensive, like the Bryce indicates. Now half the job is 6 dinarim. The imu pilam, and the workers decided, you know what, take advantage of this. So they pretended to be no longer interested. And the owner had to go along and sort of convince them to remain on the job. Malatem, I would think. Motsu Amri Lekim, if I seen an adaita the Tofas Lon Agra, Kamash Malon, Amalo adaita the Rechn Kubachilo Ashtia. So I would think that sort of when they came to an agreement, that means that the owner agrees to pay them more, even if it wasn't verbally expressed. And the conclusion is no. No, you don't get extra. Maybe I'll give you an extra drink, some food and drinks, but not that he never meant to guarantee them additional salary. Okay. Sella Noisenham Sella. Again, they did half the job here, and they changed their mind. You give them the work for half the job. So now it's treated that's obvious. Let's read the Zolavita. Mikara. Vagrina Bitfezuza. Initially, the job was actually worth 7 coins. And he offered to pay them an extra coin, 8 coins. And then at the end, when they changed their mind, the price went back up to 8 coins. The Kamma Fezuza, climb back to 8 coins. Malatema Amrlate Fezuza Amrlate Fezuza Havlon. So now these guys are saying, look, you promised us an extra coin. It's not that we don't look at this as if you hired us for 8. You hired us for 1 above the market rate. Now that the market rate is 8, not 7, so then you should pay us 9. So the Gemara says, no. The reason why I hired you is because you wouldn't take less than 8. As it wasn't worth it for you to earn less than 8 coins. Mm-hmm. But now that you're earning 8 coins and the market's also earning you 8 coins, so you weren't given 1 more than the market value, you were given 8 coins. Now we get to Rav Daisa's opinion. Rav Daisa Aimer, Shaman Lahem Esmash Osale Yasis. Hayafa Shisha Dinarim Noisin Lahem Shekel. Okay, so Rav Daisa basically says the workers here have the lower hand. So they did half the job. The problem now is the work is more expensive. It's going to be 60 dinarim to finish a job. So even though they did half the job and they were promised 2 slum for the job, you think that for half the job they'd get 1 selah. No, they actually get half of a selah. They get a shekel. Why? Because the job now is more expensive to complete. It's going to take 6 dinarim to finish a job. And they have to sort of contribute from their own salary toward the job being finished at the original price they quoted. Kasavar Yapoil al Tachtaina, Rav Dais is of the opinion that the worker that changes his mind, he has the lower hand. So Gemara says, or so either they get a shekel, 2 dinarim, because it's going to take 6 to finish a job, or they can finish a job and they get the full 2 coins. So Gemara says, Pshita, obviously if they finish a job, they'll get the full 2 coins. So Gemara says, Leitzricha de Zolavita. We're talking about a scenario where labor now is cheaper. It's the Aimer Balabayas, and the owner now is thinking of changing his mind, but the workers want the original agreement. So the workers come along and they sort of they negotiate. They engage in dialogue with the owner, who agrees to keep them on the job. I would think. I would think that the workers. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. I would think the owner could tell the workers, it's true that you negotiated with me and I agreed to keep you on the job, but that was only on condition that you lower your prices, your labor cost. Actually, what they agreed here too was that the workers would do a better job. There's workers that work and there's workers that work. Mm-hmm. Some do better jobs, some do weaker jobs. So he said, look, I understand the price went down, so if you keep us in the job, we'll do a better job. Okay. Sella, nice and lam sella. If the price has stayed the same, so you give them half a coin for half the job. Samara points out, Pshita, this is obvious. Half the job is going to be half of the original agreement. So if the original agreement was 2 coins for the whole job, 2 slum, so half the job is going to be 1 sella. Pshita, it's obvious. I'm Rafuna Breder of Nasan, like Tzricha da Izilu inhu gabe Zuza Mikara. L'saif Zilavita. What happened was initially the job was actually worth 9 coins. And he went to them and he said to them, and they went to him and said, you know what? We'll do it for a discount. We'll only do it for 8 coins. Then what happened? The price of labor now fell. And he can get the workers for 8 coins. But he says, look, our negotiation was 1 coin less than market value. And they say, no, it was 8 coins. And then the price of labor went down. I would think. The owner says, look, we agreed 1 coin less than market value. I'm not giving you 8. I'm going to give you 7 now. What we agreed was 8 coins. We weren't agreeing for one less than 9. So therefore, you have to pay us the full 8. Okay. Now, to summarize, we have a debate here between the rabbis and Rav Daisa, right? And so far, the Gemara is interpreting this debate with regard to Payalim. Payalim are hourly workers, or that type of equivalent. Workers that are paid, for every hour, like an hourly type of relationship, not on a per job basis. And Rav Daisa still says that they have the lower hand, and the rabbis say they have the upper hand. In other words, the rabbis say they're paid at divide what the total job. The job here is an estimation, not a strict consideration. So they agreed to hire him for a job for 8 coins. So every 1/8, every 1/8 of the work earns them 1 dinner. So Amar Rav Daisa follows the opinion of Rav Daisa. So the Mar says, did Rav say this? Well, Rav says, right? You talk about a work at will state. Rav's opinion is that a worker is allowed to leave the job mid-job. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you'll say, perhaps the difference here is whether the worker was hired on an hourly basis or whether he was hired on a per job basis. The reason for Rav's statement, the reason why workers are allowed to leave the job mid-job is because the verse indicates that Jews are slaves of God. And Rav interprets from that the fact that you agreed to work for somebody for an hour does not constitute a form of slavery. And therefore, if you don't like it, you can leave. However, if you agree to do the entire job for a fixed price, you're a slave to yourself, not to anybody else, because that was the type of agreement that you entered into. Mm-hmm. So perhaps that's the distinction. According to Rav Daisa, kablonos by the job, that's when you have the lower hand. But workers do not have the lower hand. Workers have the upper hand. The Chitem, if you'll say, shining later of Daisa ben Skiris and Kablonos is a difference according to Daisa between Skiris and Kablonos. Is there a difference? The Tanya we learned. A guy hires a worker. Midday, he finds out he has a relative who died, or he gets heat stroke and he has to stop working. So if he's a socher, nice and nice chori. You give him the hourly amount. Im kablan who if he was being paid on a per job basis, nice and like kablanusay. So then you give him the percentage of the kablanos that he was supposed to do. So you paid him $8 for the job, 8 dinarim for the job. He did half the job. You pay him 4. Samani, whose opinion is this? Elim Rabbanon, if it's the rabbi's opinion, well, it can't be the rabbi's opinion. Why not? Because what's the scenario in this brisa where things beyond his control happened? Right? He had a relative who dropped dead. He died. He dropped from heat exhaustion. So he's what we call an einus. It's not his fault. He's not willingly changing his mind. According to the rabbis, you don't have to drop from heat exhaustion. As long as you don't like, the food he serves you on the job, that's enough grounds to leave. Even if you don't like his attitude, you can leave for any reason or no reason at all. So why is the Brisa giving examples of sort of difficult situations? Any situation is enough, according to the rabbis. The owner always has, the worker always has the upper hand. Even if there was no inus, he got a better job offer, or he wanted a more comfortable working condition. That's fine. Or better, or better working partners, better team. 1 second. The rabbi said, "Yad parallel yayna." The hand of the worker is the worker has the upper hand. Elalav, it must be Rav Doisi. It's the opinion of Rav Doisa. Ushmamina, and we see from here, L'shayin le Rav Doisa bein schiros lekablonos. There's no difference to Rav Doisa between schiros and kablonos, between being hired as a hourly worker or as per job basis. In both scenarios, Rav Doisa is saying that over here you have an equal hand. Why? Because you're an inus, because it wasn't your fault. But if had it been your fault, you just didn't like the people you were working with, then you would have the lower hand. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak says we're talking about bedover over the divrei kol. We're talking here where the worker is engaged in work that if he leaves the job in the middle of the job, then he causes the owner a loss. It's a job where it's critical that it be finished immediately once it's begun. So therefore, he is responsible to hold through to his agreement. And even the rabbis agree that had he not, because the owner has to hire workers if he leaves the job to take it over immediately. So therefore, he does have the lower hand, except in this situation because he's an inus. It wasn't his fault that he had a relative who died in a day. He had to call out sick. Okay. Good.
Mhm.
Okay. Tanan we learned. Kol hamishana yodeh al techtoina. Whoever changes the agreement, he has the lower hand. Kol hachayzer by yodeh al techtoina, and whoever withdraws also has the lower hand. So if you change your withdrawal, what does that mean? So Bishlam kol mishana yodeh al techtoina, the Stam Tanik Rabbi Yehudah. What does changing mean? It's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah, which we have not seen yet at length. We'll see it soon. Basically, it's very simple. What you did was you were told to dye something red, right? We spoke about the guy who's supposed to paint his house purple, and he painted it black. Whole house black. Yeah. So he has the lower hand here. What's the increase in value of a house that's entirely painted black? Whatever it is, that's what you owe. It's time of Yehudah. Okay, so that's what Mishana means. Mishana to change, meaning you were told to paint the house purple, you painted it black. You changed the instruction. What about Kol HaChayzer boy? Somebody who changes his mind. He has the lower hand. What's that referring to? My love, our Mishnah was talking about people, trade workers, that were being paid per job. And the Mishnah's inclusion includes what? Poil, hourly workers. Ukur Reb Doisa, unlike the opinion of Reb Doisa. And we see clearly here that according to Rav Doisa, both hourly workers and per job workers both have the lower hand if they change their minds. Someone says, you're right. Rav Doisa tarti Kamma. Rav Doisa made both statements. Rav agrees to him with regard to a per job worker, that the per job worker, if he leaves his job, he has the lower hand. And he disagrees with him with regard to an hourly worker. An hourly worker that leaves a job has the upper hand. He's paid for the amount of hours that he put in. Another possibility is what is kol chayzer? What does somebody who changes his mind mean? Look at the Tanya, like we learned. Kol chayzer by Ketzet. How do you change your mind? So this actually is not. Basically, the new answer is as follows. The first answer was Rav Doisa says that both poil and seicher, job and hourly, both have the upper hand. Rav agrees to one and disagrees to the other. Now, it's a long brisa. We'll get through it. But the basic idea here is actually it has nothing to do with workers. What's going on here? A guy sells a field or property for $1,000. The guy puts down a $200 payment. And now somebody changes their minds. What's the story? What's the status of that $200? So let's see. So V'noisen le'mois. mehen masayim zuz. He gives him $200 for the payment. If the owner changes his mind, the buyer has the owner now decides, you know what, you didn't give me full payment, I'm changing my mind, I'm not selling it. The buyer here has the upper hand. The buyer could say, give me back my money. If you don't have my money, I'm collecting your property of 200 zuz worth because you owe it to me. You basically stole my money. And where does he collect from? From the best property. We'll have to explain that in a moment. But if the buyer changes his mind, the owner has the upper hand. If he wants, he can either give him a refund, or the seller, because the buyer changes his mind, the seller can say, you know what, I'm not giving you $200 cash. I'm giving you $200 of the worst part of the property, the worst stuff. Okay. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, we try to teach them that they should not be able to change their mind. So what do we do? How do we teach them? In effect, what we do is we encourage a contract that doesn't allow you to change your mind once you give a down payment. How is this done? Ketzad, you write in the document, ani pliny ben pliny. Macharti sada plinus pliny be'elav zuz. V'nosli mehem asayim zuz. You say, I so and so have sold the field to this guy for 1,000 coins, and he's given me 200. Basically, what we do is we're taking the last 800, and we're saying the seller says it's as if I received it and turned it into a loan. So now it's considered as if there's a full payment, and obviously, neither the buyer nor the seller could change their mind. Where do you collect from? From the best property. The Gemara says, presumably that means that if the guy spent the money, then he has to pay you back from the best of his property. The Gemara says, at best, he should be a creditor, which is not a creditor does not get idis, they don't get the best property, they get baininus, the mid-range property. And also, what about the fact that there's this property that he just paid for? So Amar Nachman Yitzchak, you're right. Me'idish Shabbat. Doesn't mean that you get a different property, the best property. You bought $1,000 field. You take $200 worth of the field from any part of the field that you want, even the most fertile parts. Umizibur Shabbat, or in the case where the buyer backs out, the seller can force him to take the worst 200 zuz worth of the field. Okay, that's one interpretation. Another interpretation. I feel him idis nechasav. Staman is of an Arab alfazuzi azule meisel umizav nechse. Behavle kenezek utan azalkat shamal hem beidis. Another possibility here is that when a guy buys a field, this is before the days of the mortgages, so he had to actually come up with 1,000 zuz. It's a lot of money. So what he typically needed to do was sell his other assets to come up with the money. And when you sell your assets like that, you fire sale, you come up with a loss. So we consider him to be as if he had nezikin, as if he had damages. And somebody who suffers damages is entitled to collect from idis, the best fields. Okay. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, we'll start in about 2 minutes. Rav Shimon gives his recommendation. What you do is you effectively write a document that the seller was paid in full and turn the rest of the payment into a loan. Time the cost of lahachi, haloi cost of hachi like honey. That's specifically because they wrote this clause in the contract. But if it wasn't written in the contract, then it would not be in effect. But Tanya we learn somebody gives his friend a collateral. He says to him, if so, he put this collateral, sort of a down payment on a house. And he says, if I change my mind, then the Aravan, the collateral, is forgiven. And the seller says to him, If I change my mind, you get back double your collateral. This guy Matanam, the condition is valid. Different Rabbi Yosi is the opinion of Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi l'tamei, the Amar Asmachta Kanya. Rabbi Yosi is of the opinion that says that an Asmachta works. We spoke about an Asmachta, basically, it's one of these conditions that's never supposed to be fulfilled. And that's exactly what this is. And Rabbi Yosi says it works anyway. And Rabbi Yehudah says, what you acquire is the percentage of the field that represents the value of the collateral. So you give the guy an expensive Rolex, you get a $25,000 portion of the field, right? But if the collateral was a set of Talmud, maybe you get $500. Okay. Amr Shimon Gamliel. Shimon Gamliel says, when is this true? This specifically is where he said that the collateral should actually acquire. This is true where the collateral. So where he says meaning that collateral should serve as payment for the field, which I'll redeem at a later point for money. But this is the actual payment. It's not just a collateral for payment. It is payment, and I'll buy back from you at a later point. But if he buys the field for 1,000 coins, and he gives him $500 down, so he acquires the field and he has to pay him back the rest. But even after many years. So we have a major contradiction here. Over here, we're saying that effectively it's the clause of turning the remainder of the payment into a loan is automatic. It doesn't have to be specified. So what's going on? The Gemara says, it depends on how desperate the seller is for money. If the seller is always banging on the buyer's door for money to get his full payment, so then we presume that that the clause must be written into the document, because you see he's so desperate for the money. Obviously, it's not an automatic clause. But if he's not so desperate, then we can presume that obviously there was intention. Obviously, there was intention for this sale to go through, and for the remainder of the payment to be turned into a loan, even if it wasn't specifically specified. Okay, have a great day.
Is there a deadline on the unpaid balance?
No, because it's turned into a loan. So it's a loan. I guess presumably the regular payment will be 30 days, but even if you weren't,